Welcome to the Road Dog Project. This is Don Muzquiz and my canine co-host Leon. Thanks to celebrity coaches, we're hitting the road and talking to the pros that make concerts and live events happen. If you'd like to support the channel, we'd appreciate a big thumbs up, and please enjoy the episode. On this episode, a touring audio engineer who can manage multiple duties: front of house mix engineer, monitor mix engineer, tour manager, production manager, and sometimes a combination of all those positions. From Ohio to Tennessee, he moved to pursue the touring industry, and now as a veteran in the business, he has amassed a hugely diverse client list, including Pat Benatar, Diamond Ring, Fuel, John Prine, Jars of Clay, Art Garfunkel, Jennifer Lopez, Travis Tritt, Joe Satriani, Leah Michelle, Eric Johnson, Kelly Pickler, Puddle of Mud, Tanya Tucker, Tracy Lawrence, Bette Midler, John Fogerty, Sarah Evans, and more. Originally from Mentor in Cleveland, Ohio, he is Rick Reith. Thanks for doing this, Rick.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. You're one of those guys that is ambidextrous, can wear lots of hats, can do lots of things. But
I have been cursed with that. Yes, I have.
Yeah, exactly. You do too good of a job, then they ask you to do it again. But if I know you like I think I do, I think that audio engineering and mixing is kind of where you're centered, and that's where if you have a vote in it, that's where you'd want to be.
My maxim had been if there's not audio involved in the job, I don't take it. So.
Well, there
but
you
I
go.
did just change that though this past year, for the first time.
I understand that. We could talk for a while about this because I've worn many hats as well. So when I don't do production manager or tour manager and mixing, I can see where some of the other things will suffer a little bit when I'm not, when I'm able to focus on just one.
Yes.
How do you manage that yourself when you have to dual role?
It can be difficult. I
Yeah.
mean, that for sure. I mean, a lot of people say, jack of all trades, master of none. I hate to say it in this regard, but definitely things can be not as full 8 cylinders firing on every endeavor at all times.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of, run, put out the fires as necessary, I find, and kind of float in between and just try and keep us all inflated as highly as possible.
Right. Well, it keeps you on your toes. I mean, it's kind of like, for me, it's kind of like you can't, there's really kind of not a minute. When you get a minute off of one thing, then you got to make sure that you're covering aspects of the other job.
Well, with all those different irons in the fire, you always have to have stuff in the back of your mind. So it does kind of distract you a little bit, because I've had shows that I know may have been a little bit better audio-wise because I had 6 different things, a band fight on the bus or some pressing matter with media or some other thing that I had to,
Right.
take care of or make sure happen. And
What about studio work, recording, things like that? Do you do any of that?
When I first came to town, I moved down at the encouragement of a very good friend. It's been my very good friend for like 35 years, and he's a session guy in town playing guitar. And we were roommates, and we had a basement studio with DA-88s, which were popular back in the mid-90s. And we did a number of publishing demos. So I had several different, I had to wait for months to get my check from several different record companies doing publishing demos. And I got on the road basically full-time after that, and kind of gave up on the recording thing.
I gotcha. So one of the things that I think we have in common is that we have that sort of have to have that hustle mentality. We are usually juggling a couple of different projects, a couple of different artists. We have artists that we work for that are not Nashville based, yet we live here.
Right.
And we kind of have that option because a lot of Nashville acts aren't going to hire you if you don't live here. So, I mean, do you find that to be the case?
I find that very true, which is probably one of the reasons I've stayed in Nashville. I mean, I don't have enough. I came to Nashville first. I'm from Cleveland in 1993, and I broke into the country music market because that's what Nashville was. And of course, now it's, as with everything, genres morph, and there's different influences here. And I started to acquire some international, New York and LA-based clients, which have nothing to do with the Nashville way of doing things.
Right.
But I don't have enough of that where I can rely on living anywhere I want and be flown in all the time. So I stay in Nashville to have the low-hanging fruit of the access, if you will.
Well, it's the option because, most of the acts will bus out of here, and if you're not here, they're usually not going to fly you in unless it's a major tour. So let's talk about the ugly truth with the pandemic and stuff like that, and sort of being in that independent role. When you're juggling a couple different acts and have things coming up down the line. What were you What were you about to do? What happened January, February for you, and where are you now?
Got the big quietus put on our careers there for a minute, but
Yeah.
I had just come off of a reasonably good winter and started working with a guy named Chase Bryant doing some country stuff,
Yeah.
and then I had just been hired as New Kids in the Block's production manager.
Awesome.
My first non-audio gig, and we were set to start, ironically, to do a cruise, which was one of the first things that came up on the radar as not being a good thing to do before this whole thing crashed, and that was supposed to be had been in April. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of like sitting. Treading water. Luckily, I have some good friends who are actually road guys who have a band in town, and they work locally every week. And I've been able to do one gig a week every Sunday. So
that's awesome.
That's been a lot of fun. At least be connecting with my craft and mixing and music. Let alone the income. So.
Keeps the dust from settling too
So
much.
I'm just kind of waiting, treading water until I'm lucky that I'm able to tread some water and not struggle and not have to go out and necessarily get a job I don't want to do. I'll get it, and of course, to make ends meet, I'll do whatever I need to do. But
Right.
I'm not quite at that point yet.
Yeah. What's your thought about the progress, the hopeful progress that we have next year for getting back to something close to what we used to be doing?
I'm actually encouraged. I was, I think everybody's kind of gone like a little bit, up and down kind of thing over the months. And when I first started, I was very resilient about my thoughts. No, this will blow over. And then, of course, as the months waned and everything kept going, we realized it was a little bit more than that. And then I just saw some things. Like I have some industry contacts, with management, and different agents and different things. And I just saw something that came out from, I think it was Billboard, that there's a large number of artists who have booked for 2020, 21, rather.
Yeah.
And we'll see if that continues to pick up. Now, it's not going to be the spectrum from like low to high. And they're, the bigger name artists and everyone else in between may take some more time to ramp up. But hopefully that will be allowed to happen. And be allowed to have people in a big space.
Well, and hopefully people will feel comfortable getting back out there, audience-wise, you know what I mean? Because the partial attendance sort of venues and gigs that have been happening, it's not the experience that they want, and it's definitely not the experience that the artist wants either.
No.
It feels like a show that nobody showed up for, you know what I mean? And it doesn't feel good on either end, on the stage or off,
For many different reasons, yes.
Yeah, a lot of different reasons.
Many different reasons.
Yeah. And so do you have like family and stuff that are outside the business that don't understand? Because I have a lot of people that don't understand why we haven't gone back to work.
Not too many people. Most of I'm a single kid kind of thing, and my folks live up in Ohio, and they, I've been doing this for 35 years for a living, music, so they're kind of accustomed to, good years and bad years, or not so good years, or however you want to look at it. But, most of my friends, I'm like a rock star to a lot of them because they stayed home and did their thing. And when I come home, we go out and and of course I invite some friends to certain shows, and I'm in the areas and all that in different regions.
Sure.
And, so everyone knows that this is what I do, and I'm holding out for it because I'd like to continue to do what I do.
Oh, exactly right.
I think once we get the all go, that'll definitely, there are people just waiting, like standing at the block, waiting for the gun to fire so we can all take off.
Yeah.
And sadly, a lot of people who weren't going to retire this year decided to do it. They're going to wait a couple more years. A lot of people just get in the business have been forced to go back to whatever they did before, back to their parents, back to whatever. And so it's shaken out a lot of the business. And I don't know what that's going to do, but I know there are still people that want to do this and are needing to do this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So let's go back a little bit and tell a little bit more of your story. You came out of Mentor High School.
Mentor High School, yes.
Were you a fighting cardinal?
I was a fighting cardinal. I actually didn't letter in basketball. I played in junior high, but I got into the music department, as you might imagine. In the show choir, I played drums and danced in the second row and sang Billy Joel hits from the 80s.
Oh, nice.
Among other things, but
And was there a marching band thing? Did you do that?
I did not do marching band. I was in the same music wing, but I chose the choral music, vocal music.
Okay, very cool. Tell me about that progression you were playing, and then you somewhere along the line you noticed the sound console somewhere.
Well, I started playing drums in bands in school, and I was in that show choir, and then I met my friend when he was 16 and I was 18, and he was like a local prodigy, and he got in with a band I was actually doing sound for already, and my whole thing was I played in a couple different bands in school, but all the cool kids and the better musicians were in better bands, and I couldn't compete musically, so I started, they were my friends, so I started to do sound and get involved with that for those different bands.
Yeah. So
I kind of departed playing. I still dabble in all the different, all the major food groups and popular music, but but I devoted my career to being an engineer, a sound guy, because I guess I saw the writing on the wall compared to the talent doling out. He got this, I got this. Well, maybe if I need to do this, I should try something else.
Yeah.
Right?
And was there what were the shows that you went to in your high school days or afterwards, concerts and things like that?
Well, the first show my dad took me to when I was 14 was it was a friend's dad. It was the Beach Boys.
Oh.
So I saw them at Blossom Music Center. We all know Blossom.
Yeah.
And then the next show I got to see. I think I was 15. So my dad took me to see Rush.
Oh, okay.
The Signals tour in 1982. And that was the last parental concert that I went. All the rest were older kids at that point. But I was into the math rock early, so
okay.
I'm a big prog rock fan.
Well,
so.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. So that stuff had a big impact on you. For me as a kid when I went to concerts, stuff just like I think the product, just like it was the whole experience, but the production was something I never expected. As a kid, just the lighting and the sound and things like that. So from early age, I got drawn into that as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the whole spectacle. I mean, the energy. There's something about being in the show and waiting in line for the bathroom and all those different things that occur when you're
absolutely.
That occur when you're going to one of those shows.
Yeah, absolutely.
There it is, downtown. Look at that.
Yeah.
What a different skyline from just a few years ago.
Oh man. So then, so you're playing, and then you start doing sound. And so when did you move from there to here, or did you move just live anywhere else?
Well, staying in the Cleveland area, I worked with a couple different bands, and I got in with a working band that would play. I would have like a tux kind of shirt, suit, and all that stuff with a bow tie and all that, and then we'd go play a bar mitzvah or a high school reunion, and then several bars regionally across the northeastern Ohio area and Michigan and Pennsylvania and whatnot. And we did a 2-week stint at Sloppy Joe's twice a year in Key West, and I'd done like 6 of those, and we couldn't wait to get there, and we couldn't wait to leave. But every time we couldn't wait. It was the same cycle. So I kind of did that, and I kind of realized, not that I was the best sound guy or in Cleveland, but I got to be like a big fish in a little pond musically. And my friend, the guitarist, had moved the year prior, 1992, and encouraged me, "Come on, man, I got a gig already. You can get out of there, come down here." So I told the band I was quitting in Cleveland, and then I'm like, "Sure, it's my last gig." And they're like, "Yeah, Rick's not going to quit." And then I didn't come back the next week, and they realized I was serious, and I drove very hillbilly style in my pickup truck. And actually, drove to Nashville on the 31st was Halloween when I moved. And that next day, Halloween night, I guess, I arrived, and the next morning I picked up my friend, and we drove to Key West to do one of those gigs. Okay. So and that started my Nashville career.
I see. And so, and then what other? You start networking. You start getting some sound company work here. What did you go after?
Well, it's funny that not initially. No, when I knew some people who were I knew a guy that had a Grammy that would come and stay on our couch from Cleveland that would try and come and get work in the meantime. And I worked part-time jobs. I worked like for a temporary agency just to make one. I was having ramen and Little Debbie's cakes, and for about 6-8 months there. And I got in working on a crew at Opryland doing trade shows.
Okay.
And so I was working with this temporary agency, and they had another crew of people that were working at Starwood, which is the old shed here in Nashville. And they would come in as stagehands because they could run the forklifts and do a little bit more work than just your basic temporaries. And immediately I gravitated toward them, and I was in music. And there were some people who are now musicians with bands, and other people who've gone on to be very famous engineers that I work with in the same pile that were at Starwood at the time. And then that next year, I was working at Starwood, and then the guy was on my couch, commuting from Cleveland to Nashville, and he got a gig with a guy named James House. He was playing piano, and they needed a guitar tech. And well, I couldn't do that, so I'm like, "You're on my couch, get me that job." So I immediately went on the road, and within a couple weeks, I was doing monitors and guitar tech.
Okay.
And then after like a year, I became front of house production manager.
Okay. Yeah.
It kind of just starts to build from there. But
that's cool. And so all this time you've been here in Nashville, and you've picked up some of the outside acts that are not based here, things like that.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. I have many friends that I work a lot with Claire Global, and it was at just MD Systems back in the day, and then MD Claire, and then Claire Global now. But different guys in different jobs, and they all have different networks of friends and people looking for people to do a fill-in. Hey, man, can you do this? Or I got the perfect guy. And good friend of mine got me basically hooked up with another guy who became a good friend who was looking to replace his position because he got a new job, as we often do, to try and fill in. And so I got a job with Joe Satriani, which is my first non-Nashville gig.
Okay.
And we went out, and he had to doing some makeup dates, so we weren't carrying, because Joe loves to carry, everything, and we were makeup dates, doing, the usual suspect clubs all over the Pacific Northwest, and I was just smile and dial, and it was not easy over a range of different gear, but he was impressed enough to want to hire me, and then I got, carrying an old rig, and then kind of morphed from there, and I actually met Eric Johnson, who was an opening act, because I guess they did the first G3 together.
Okay.
And Eric came out as a support act for Joe's Super Colossal tour. I think that was in 2005. And I had, always been a big EJ fan, and I'd never worked with him before. And he came out, and over the course of the tour, as the production manager, I had to facilitate more than just making sure that they had sound. And I had my third guy, Bobby, do monitors for Eric anyway. I was doing monitors for Joe Satriani.
Yeah.
And so then the next year, Eric called me to come and be the TM for him, and then Randy Lane, who was mixing front of house, Randy Lane, you probably know Randy. He was mixing front of house, and he came out mixing front of house for Eric because Eric was familiar with his work. But then Randy couldn't do it, so they got me out there doing front of house. So all of a sudden, I'm tour manager front of house for Eric, and so that was my introduction to the guitar heroes.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, while we're there, what's the shortest and the longest sound check you've done with Eric Johnson?
Let's see. Let's just say that I had to think about the shortest and longest, but I had to make them. I had to stop both of them no matter what. He likes to play around with his rig. He likes to modify in this and try this, and so if we would let him, he would go from sound check until doors, and often I had to hold doors, as you probably had to as well. But try and discourage that as much as possible.
He's very meticulous.
Meticulous is a very good word.
And then when you're working with several different guitar players, it's interesting to see the different approaches. You know what I mean? When all of them are about the tone, but the approach is so much different. And talk about gear and things like that with Eric. There was often times when they were out, at pawn shops and things like that, trying to pick up stuff he could try out.
I remember one particular gig, I think it was at the Coach House we played in Cali, and one of the guys was vacuuming in the background. I'm like, can you just wait until the sound check is over? And Eric's like, no, Rick, wait. He's like, that's an A. Bring it up here. And he had me mic the vacuum cleaner, and he droned, and he, as he often does the drone thing, like his intro to Cliffs and all that. And he brought it up during the show, and I mic'd it, and he soloed over the drone vacuum cleaner for about 10 minutes.
That is fun. Oh my God, only Eric. Wow. Putting a resume together is not something I'm a fan of. It's sort of like name dropping sort of thing. And it's like, and there's a whole art to resumes and things like that. But I like the way that you listed the years and what you did in each year and that sort of thing. It's just, that's all you need.
It's like the fourth version. I mean, I kind of cop that off. I got to give credit to Buddy Russell who did that, because I like, what other cool way? It looks so cheesy and all this company names and all this, and I just.
And describing.
And there's so much to cram in a small space.
It is, and if you go into.
I guess I'm lucky to be able to say that.
Well, exactly.
Or a guy that just has one artist for 25 years too. There's that.
Yeah, and I always tell people, it's like, if it's more than a page or more than 2 pages, who's gonna read it? If you got too much detail.
That's what they say. They never look at the second page, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, over the years now, who are you most excited to mix, and who challenged you the most?
Now, that's a good question. There have been a few. I would think that I really enjoyed mixing. When you get with a band of the music that like you grew up with, I've been fortunate enough to work with a few artists that I've really enjoyed the music of as a kid and lived that period. And I enjoyed mixing Pat Benatar quite a bit. That was a lot of fun. I knew every song, and it's just like I know every part of every song. And
well, I actually was going to ask you about when you get to mix songs that you grew up on and things like that, and Pat Benatar is one of them.
Oh yeah.
And about Debbie Harry.
That was another good thing. That was one of the things I kind of drifted into. There was a period where I was just like, I could not be less busy.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
I was, or more busy, I guess
Yeah.
is the word.
Yeah.
More busy.
Okay.
Cut.
Yeah. That's
I
right.
couldn't be more busy.
Yeah.
And I was doing every different multiple hat job. I was like,
Yeah.
I got the Debbie Harry gig from another buddy who was, needs somebody to fill in.
Yeah.
And I was currently in New York doing stuff with Bette Midler. I was doing monitors for her and rehearsing and doing a bunch of
Yeah.
private stuff and whatnot. And
Yeah.
so I was trying to advance this Debbie Harry tour, and I hired my good friend Russell, who did me a good favor to come out and be the production manager. He'd never really done it before, so I was basically dumping the advance, because the production manager, as we know, does most of the advance
Right.
for these tours. And
Exactly.
so I dumped it on him so I could do rehearsals and not, because I would sit there and with Bette and like looking at her and typing responses to email and going back and forth and trying to keep it all together. Where was I going with that? So Debbie Harry came together in that regard. And I had never met her, and like we talked a couple different times, conference call, and went through the whole screening with management. And so I meet her at rehearsals in New Jersey before the tour starts. We're going to finish rehearsals, load the bus, and get out of town. And I remember I walk in, and they're all rehearsing. I fly in, I walk in, and she looks at me, and she's like eyeing me up while they're singing. She stops the song, and she goes, "Oh, you must be the illustrious Rick Reith." And I was like, "Oh my God!"
Yeah.
I'm kind of like taken aback, and I'm like, "Yes, yes,
Yeah,
I am."
that's me.
And walked up and shook her hand, and it was all cool from there. But I was it was, I guess, what's the word, a little nerve-wracking meeting someone who had a poster on your wall when you were a kid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And she's stopping the band and calling your name. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Another legend, actually, still when we were growing up, Art Garfunkel. How was that?
Yeah, well, that's another one, the mixing thing. Granted, Paul isn't there, but Art was the voice, that Paul wrote for Art. I mean, it's self-admitted. And to be able to hear it, because I skipped school in 1983 when I was 16, and my friend and I drove his 65 and a half Mustang convertible to Akron Rubber Bowl from Ohio, and we sat there, and it was the first American show of the reunion tour. They did a couple warm-up dates in Canada. It's after the New York, the Central Park thing in '82.
Yeah.
So every song has been indelibly part of my upbringing, like all the records since I was a little kid. And to get that job, and of course, we know that certain jobs, it can be tough, or you hear certain things about certain people. But I mean, all the things people might say about Art, I mean, that I still list that as one of my top gigs.
Yeah.
Because of the connection I got with the music. I mean, at the time I got the job, he was just recovering from losing his voice, and he wasn't in full voice.
Yeah.
But over the course of my tenure, like 3 years I did with him, it came back like the end of the first year. And so I'm sitting there like at Albert Hall, for example, mixing Sounds of Silence and singing, and it's just like chills. And it's like, you don't get that very often.
Absolutely.
You know
Well, and he's and he's not somebody who's going to be touring every year either. So you were in on
Not
that
really.
rare moment,
Right.
And do you think he will anymore? You think he'll tour again? I mean,
well, he's just turned 79 just a couple weeks ago, and he likes to work. He's impassioned by the music, and I think if there's we have a touring world to go back to, he'll certainly.
That's
do that.
awesome.
Yeah.
And which one of these do you think that you spent the most time with? Like, was there kind of a thing where you
The most time?
Yeah.
When I first came to town, like I met some people that, like, for example, that worked with George Strait for years, and we all know people that have had the legacy gigs that have been there forever. And I find that I was with Diamond Rio for 3 years when I first came to town. Like, that was the longest gig I'd had to date, and I kind of thought that was like my limit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I kind of started to jump around. Some people say, "Oh, you've had so many gigs. Well, you never stay with anybody." Well, I did, a certain period over periods of years. And things change, people change. Needs change, finances change, everything changes.
Well,
so
and I think for people outside the business, it looks like you can't keep a job. But the thing about it is that the artists are the ones that take breaks. They're the ones that can't necessarily keep you employed. Those legacy gigs are far and few between as far as people that stay on a payroll forever and ever. But yeah, you want to stay on somebody's payroll if you can.
Ideally,
but they just they have to take breaks, for whatever reasons. They do a tour or they
have
do
children, all these things.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
they do a couple of years and they go, "Hey guys, we're going to be off for a while," or whatever it is. Tell me about your time with John Prine. We just lost him.
Yeah, we did. That was a wonderful time. That was kind of an interstitial gig. I had been working with Tracy Lawrence, and I got the opportunity to work with John doing front of house, and I did about a year with him, and he wasn't working quite heavily at the time, but it was quite unique because he was carrying a small line array in a truck with a monitor rig in the back line, and we would drive this modified box truck that had a sleeper kind of built on the frame across the country, and then we went up across Canada, and they would fly everywhere, but we would drive as the crew, myself and Paul, the monitor guy. And we all get like certain responses when we do shows. Like we've all been to shows like where the energy is so great and the applause is so great, you're literally floating above the ground. I mean, even though you weren't necessarily like a musician or like the performer, like as a technician responsible for some of the performance, we take some of that thrill. And the most sustained adrenaline rush I can attribute to that I've gotten was in Victoria Island with John, and I can't remember the name of the theater there, but in Vancouver. And we were there, and literally it was like 5 minutes of the most incredible, uproarious, standing ovation that I've ever experienced. And I'm almost like, I'm a little chilly in here now, but maybe that's what it is. But that I'll never forget that. I mean, with John, and that's unique to being employed with him.
Be a part of that. It's awesome.
He was the nicest guy. I mean, like on nights off, he would, if he was going to stick around before he flew out, we would come down and shoot pool and have a beer with the guys, kind of thing, and hang out. And he'd obviously very funny. Great sense of humor.
I've heard nothing but great stuff about him. Going back to when you kind of focused on being an audio guy and things like that, were there guys that mentored you? Are there other guys that you sort of that inspired you at all, or anybody that you were like, oh, he's the guy, or that sort of thing?
Oh, certainly. No, I when we have these different, that's the thing is I mean, there's no like decrying anything as good or bad. People that have a job with one artist, they get to see like one certain way a certain thing works, and having worked with 25 or 30 different artists in my career, I get to see a diversity of how management approaches things, how artists approach things, how, and the spectrum of people, and it's quite diverse. I mean, some are way better than others, and some are pretty bad. I mean, and some are incredible, and I've had good people that I've had to, for example, everyone hates the bad tour manager who doesn't tell you this or that, and they don't know when to be. There's no schedule, there's no book of lies, there's no anything. So, so I learned as I became a manager type by being influenced by, I won't name names, certain people as I came up with different organizations, that how to be. I mean, I strive to achieve, the best you can be with everyone. I mean, and sometimes, you have to sacrifice. I mean, like you just can't expect things to fall in line without effort. And I've gone many nights with less sleep than I would have liked because I had to make sure things are right for as many people as possible. And that requires some sleepless time. So.
Well, that's something I tell my friends and family a lot of times too, because they'll see something on social media. I say, man, you're seeing the highlights. I said, we drop a lot of names and it looks like it's all fun and games, but I haven't slept in the last couple months. You know what I mean? It's like, it's real work. You also learn from the guys that aren't necessarily doing a great job, if you're not in that role or whatever, whether it's a production manager, tour manager, whatever, and you go, okay, well, that's what I don't want to do.
Exactly.
As well as guys that you go, that guy's got it together, and I want to.
No,
follow.
Exactly that. I mean, you pick the best as from what you've come across. I mean, there have been guys like I've been doing this things a certain way, and then some guy is like in that position that I'm under, if you will, or whatever, working with, and I learn like, wow, and I add it to my repertoire of tricks or whatever,
exactly.
Bag of tricks. So.
Oh, matter of fact, when we get done here, I got to call Buford Jones. I'm trying to get him on here.
It's funny because the only other person that asked me to be interviewed was Buford, and I kind of turned it down. That was like 10 or 11 years ago.
Really?
But he was doing a series, when he had that suite over at sound check with Meyer and all that different stuff. And I was out with Taylor Swift, and we were in Australia, and they had just shifted away from Sound Image, and Dave Payne kind of took the account away, and they had Major Tom, and Lars Bergard was over there with a bunch of that stuff, and Martin, who mixes Judas Priest, he was out there taking Russell Fisher, who was my tenant for 15 years, who mixed Taylor Swift to start. He got let go, and Martin came out, because I was like looking forward to being in front of house with Gloriana on that tour as the opening act for Taylor, and hanging out with Russell, and we were like roommates technically, or housemates. And so I remember Buford was there, and he's like, oh man, Rick, and I had my own little separate console, little SC48. Oh man, the vocals are great. And he was like always over my shoulder, and and he's like, can you want to come in? And I was reticent because I really didn't, I didn't want to be that self-ingratiating guy who gets interviewed kind of thing. So,
well, it doesn't.
Don't turn in a page.
Yeah, man, it doesn't happen a lot for, some of these positions.
I was working with Tracy Lawrence and I had just gotten the first PM5D from Spectrum. It wasn't even the RH. It had the, like the old O2R style freeze with the knobs on top for the gain, and we had a little outboard rack. Anyway, so I'm out there and I just got the console, and Buford's headlining with Clint Black at the time with his XL4 set up, and I'm kind of in front of him, and I remember like everyone was up there, and Buford's just looking down his glasses over my shoulder, and I'm like, I was uncomfortable to have him over my shoulder like the entire show, and he's like, man, I mean, you can hear everything, and all the the different. If anything else, you can definitely hear spatial panning in a Yamaha product like that.
You got Buford Jones over your shoulder complimenting your mix. That's awesome.
Well, it was a little, like I said, unnerving. And then, of course, once I got to know him, it wasn't so bad. But the first time, I'm like, oh, that's the guy. And I'm on a Yamaha that's, even without an Apogee or anything at the time, they didn't have a word clock. So it was as unrefined as they were in their original state.
Very cool.
I might say, but
very cool. You're also in my same age group as well. So you went from analog to digital. Tell me about how you saw that and how you went through all that stuff.
Well, I don't know if I've went to say that I went begrudgingly, but
kicking and screaming.
They dragged me. I was the crusty old guy with gray in his beard. They would remember the old days when we had to have 8 guys lift that console. I can do it with 2 people now. And, as with most things, new technologies, there's a departure from an established paradigm where everything's clicking, everything's working. And I always make the joke, here's analog, or here's analog photography, here's digital photography. Well, here's analog photography, still going like this. Here's digital, here's like the time goes by, and okay, now it's like this. But it took how many years?
Yeah.
Same thing with audio.
Yeah.
I mean,
Very true.
Many, and of course, everyone is offering convenience over quality, and that whole sad shift over our world, it seems, not just our industry, but the world, is kind of cheapened everything. And so, like I mentioned, I had the PM5D, one of the first ones that came out to Spectrum in 2004 with Tracy Lawrence, and it didn't sound great, so right off the bat, my mix is going off of whatever analog desk I would get, provided at the time if I wasn't carrying. It immediately dropped.
Yeah.
I mean, I was using disposable cameras on the road, and then I got one of those little Mavica floppy disk cameras with 640 by 480 resolution. Remember those middle floppy disk things? And I was like,
awesome.
and like it went from, so I just
that was
quit taking pictures because what's the point?
Right.
So I suffered with it, and of course now then people realize when digital started, maybe we should put the analog front end back on so we can have some kind of, humanity to it, warmth or something. And then now the combination of technologies is the hybrid between networks and latency reduction, all the different stuff we can get to make it fine-tuned is made it more acceptable. I'm fortunate to have some friends at different sound companies allow me to come in and woodshed on different consoles before I get a job if they're using that I'm not familiar with. And
well, you were talking about how when you were doing Satriani, and I'm sure there was other acts that we've both, the kind of tours that we've done where you're walking in with a briefcase and maybe a vocal microphone or something, and you got a different sound system every day. And in those days, I didn't have a problem. It was like I could make anything work, and I'm sure you felt the same way. But when it comes to digital, the consistency is not there. From console to manufacturer, different manufacturers, things like that. There's no consistency. So I spend more time trying to find stuff on a console than being able to listen and mix. That's the
I missed that cue. Oh, that one's gone. Oh, shit, we're the next song. Okay, just push the faders.
Just kidding. On top of trying to make something sound good, EQ things and things like that, I'm still busy trying to find stuff. That's always been my dilemma. It just takes me longer to find, and then get used to one console, and now you got to use this one. So I think in some ways, like the digital console thing now is, I think the idea was that we were supposed to be able to, everybody could use it and everybody could share and you could bring your file and that sort of thing. But I still get a lot of stuff where we're not sharing. You got to bring your own console. So wait a minute, we're all using digital consoles now. Why can't I?
That's the point, right?
It didn't really do that trick that it was supposed to. I don't think. If you were going to choose a console right now, you could have anything you wanted. What would it be? Would it be analog or digital or?
Well, no footprint considerations,
Yeah,
no
don't worry about-
trucking,
yeah,
no
yeah, yeah.
weight, no
Yeah,
cost.
whatever you
There's
want.
another stuff on racks.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the artist.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if I was doing some techno band or like some major pop artist, I would probably choose a digital console because I have the ability to recall scenes, and they're going to be diverse in, as
Yeah.
far as what's required. But if I'm doing like a legacy old school artist, like I'm out mixing a classic rock band or something, I would like it in a Midas console with some awesome outboard that we all had and love and know well and know sounds better than I think than most of the digital stuff.
Absolutely. Again, if you were going to design something right now, what's some of your systems that you would go to in terms of manufacturers and cabinets and things that you like now?
Well, I'm really fond of D&B. I mean, that kind of took a while for me to get a lot of diversity of different gigs with that, because it was a lot of the L-acoustic stuff was prominent in the higher end gigs. And then I like the first time I mixed a festival on the K1s, I think it was like Reading or Leeds or something in the UK, and I was like, my front of house is quite far away from the stage until I heard those speakers, and it was a throw and go, so I didn't really get an opportunity to mess with it before, and I walked out there and it was like, wow, those K1s are incredible. So I mean, move a lot of air. So those two manufacturers I'm quite pleased to use.
What about microphones? What are your go-tos, or what are you going for? What are you asking for if you're walking into?
Well, that's diverse too. I mean, like everybody can provide a Shure package these days, and Sennheiser and Audix are ubiquitous. I mean, if you can get your own kit, it just depends again on the band, depends on the technique of the drummer. If you're doing a jazz kit, I would have a different kick drum mic than I would if I was going to do a rock drummer, or pop thing. I mean, it just depends. I like your standard stuff. I mean, I'm a fan of a combination of kick drum mics. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily like one. I mean, I can make it work with one and have for many years.
But you like to have the option.
I like to have the ability to craft a little bit more. As far as manufacturers, I mean, I like the Royer is great for guitars. I've been using that on a couple different gigs. On the gigs that don't have Kempers or other, what's the other one? The other guitar.
I know.
It's called a pod. No, it's Fractal. Sorry,
Fractal. Yeah.
But so what? Actually, the people that use amplifiers, I prefer. The 57 works great. 409s, if you can find an old original 409, love those on guitars.
Okay, very cool.
Vocal mics is a whole different thing because that's unique to the singer. I mean, I've had the range of mics on all kind of different singers.
Yeah. And then, are you generally trying to find some analog outboard, or are you for vocals, or do you use
some artists would travel with like a pre for the artist's vocal, no matter what, even if they weren't carrying a rig. I like to get analog as much as possible in there, even if it is just like a Vox box. I use a Vox box on Pat, and it took a good result, and that gave me really good, good tonality and reasonable limiting to keep her voice under control. And I remember Neil saying that, the wife's voice sounds great. Can you make my guitar sound like that?
Yeah.
Which is like from the guitar player. But,
very cool.
But he was happy with the voice.
Absolutely. Of course, they've done thousands of interviews over the years, but just fairly recent interview with them too, Neil and Pat Benatar, with Dan Rather. He had a series, the Big Interview series. Very cool story. Some of the stuff I hadn't heard about when they met and things like that, when he came in and stuff. But always appreciated their work. It was always a little different, even from everybody else.
Oh yeah, growing up in Cleveland in particular, because Neil Giraldo's from the west side of Cleveland.
Oh, okay.
They were big on the radio station that we grew up listening to, WMMS, and whenever they came into town, they'd always be on the radio. And in fact, I had a cousin who actually played in a band with Neil back in the day. He could play with Eric Carmen, played drums for Eric Carmen, basically after the Raspberries and the solo stuff.
Okay.
And, so when it was determined that I was, we're from the same region, and I was a paisan immediately. So I was immediately accepted into the Giraldo Benatar family.
Nice.
It turns out that Neil's sister lived 3 streets over from me for the last 30 years.
Oh wow!
And so Pat had been on my street basically to get over to her sister-in-law's house for
cool.
years, and I had no idea.
Man,
another good view of the city there.
Yeah.
Wow, I hadn't seen this one in a while.
Stuff is growing. Speaking of here in Nashville, did you suffer anything in February with the tornado?
No, I was fortunate. I didn't really know anyone that was affected other than the poor folks in East Nashville and other places in that line. It seems it's the same line that the tornado came when it came through. When was it, 99 or 98?
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember exactly. It was
no damage for me.
Yeah, well, good. The other major natural disaster we had was the 2010 flood. Where were you in that thing? Were you on the road or were you? Uh-oh.
I was just coming back into town, and I remember hearing the stuff on the news. Everyone was freaked out, and I was with the band Gloriana, and we were doing the bus at the Brentwood Kroger, which, as you know, kind of has that lower kind of down off the road.
Yeah.
And as we were coming into town, we were just discovering the not geysers, but the roadways that were blocked and whatnot. And we pull in the Kroger, and I was the tour manager, and the girls were very young at that time. And I remember one of the girls' mothers called me on the phone and asked, will you take my daughter home? I don't want her driving in this. And the mother, who was just, I think, a year younger than me at the time, kind of got upset, and she says, there's a GD house floating down Route 24 at Bell Road. And it's like, she doesn't have a lot of experience driving. I said, I'll take care of your daughter. And I remember I had a pickup truck, and literally, like, the point is mentioning that when we pull in to park the bus to get the cars, the water's just pouring down these chutes into the parking lot from the roadway above and everything. And we're like, is this going to flood? I mean,
yeah.
So we get there, and I had a pickup truck at the time, with no tonneau cover or anything. And so we put our baggage into big garbage bags, threw them in the back of my truck, and off we go. And the little Ranger, it's got some reasonable clearance. So there's a couple roads that we couldn't go on because I am not going to get in that because it's going to take the truck down the road. We're going to float down the river. And so it took us about 20 minutes to get around. And I was at 8th Avenue, just right there by Melrose Burger, I guess, or Melrose Place, or whatever it's called, by
ML Rose.
ML Rose, yes. And Melrose is the bowling place across the street, but we used to play there. So the 8th Avenue was flooded, and it was just, I saw a homeless person pushing a golf cart with like knee-deep water. I'm like, that's getting pretty high. I don't want to. So I kind of got in the middle of it. I'm like realizing this isn't good. I need to shut my truck off. So I did. I'm like, I didn't want this.
Yeah.
So I look at her, and she kind of looked at me and freaked out. And so I get out of the truck, and it was pouring and whatever. I'm like, well, just jump over and put in neutral and steer. I'm going to push. I'm going to push up and just go up into that parking lot over there. And the homeless person, and whomever it was, with a cart full of recyclables, stops. Hey man, comes over and helps me push. And I'm like in almost thigh deep water, pushing my truck. We park it up there, and anyway, so we come back, and it was quite an adventure. But I finally got her home like an hour later because I couldn't go this way and I couldn't go this way. We had to turn around and go here, and her mom was freaking out the whole time.
What's so funny about that time too is like you don't realize where all the hills and valleys are until it floods. You know what I mean? Like you're talking about that area there. I wouldn't think about that area as low, but if I'm paying more attention, I can see that. Same thing with Lower Broadway. Of course, it's leading right down to the river. That was an absolute river. People were going down with canoes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, we've all done gigs, in the river stages where the waters come up. I mean, I've been, had a hammock underneath the stages back there, and like literally the water is just, it was like 2 feet below me, now it's a foot below me, and
yeah, scary stuff.
Scary stuff on the river.
Yeah, man. My co-host here, who's not impressed with our conversation, but I was going to ask you, do you have any history of animals in your family?
I do. I grew up with dogs, Basenjis. They're barkless dogs from the African Congo.
Wow.
They're very unique.
Yeah, I don't know if I've heard of that.
You should check them out. They look like little deer. A lot of people say they look like very little deer. They have curly tails. They yodel. They don't really bark.
Okay.
What's the matter, Leon? You never heard of a Basenji? I'm sorry. I didn't
all right, so being from Ohio and stuff, you got to tell them. Let's talk about some serious stuff. Let's talk about food. Are you a Skyline chili guy?
Well, Cleveland and other cities in Ohio have like rivalries, and of course the Bengals and Cleveland Brown rivalry was big in the '80s. And I remember Sam Weiss saying, because there was a thing, people were throwing bones on the field or whatever from the dog pound. And Sam Weiss, who was the head coach of the Bengals, said something about, and you don't live in Cleveland. And it was a big national thing, and that put a lot of people off. So I've had Cincinnati chili, and it's good, but I like, more thick chili, let's just say.
I see. Is there something that when you go home and when you go back to Ohio, is there something you got to
Oh
have?
yeah. There's a place in Cleveland. It's a deli on 21st and St. Clair called Slyman's. And
Okay.
they make the best roast beef sandwiches you've ever had.
Okay.
Corned beef, or like Reuben, whatever you like.
I'm going to
But,
document this.
Slyman's. I mean, every time we go up there, I mean, I've had doing radio shows. I've had radio reps bring the food to the station because they knew we wanted it, stuff like that.
Oh, very cool.
Let alone the specific trips we send runners on, or
Yeah, I
whatever.
was going to say, after show food, you send some runners out for after show food when you get in the area.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. And
it's not cheap, but it's really good.
Well, hey man,
nothing's cheap anymore, though, right?
Exactly. But I mean, it's not fast food either, right?
No.
Yeah.
No. And you can definitely take the second half home for lunch or for your snack later. So.
Very cool.
Now you're up.
Yeah. So when you're on the road, when you're on a bus and you're not in Ohio, where are you asking the driver to stop at, or where are you asking everybody to where you want to try to eat at?
Well, a lot of people have diverse stuff. Most people I know when we're on the road, if they have a specific diet, they'll bring it. Like artists, in particular, if I happen to be on an artist/crew bus, they'll do that. A lot of people are into sushi, and when it became popular, I ate sushi a lot, but I haven't had sushi in Nashville. I can't tell you how many years. I usually wait till I'm in one of my favorite places on the coast somewhere. And that has better. So I mean, it just depends on where we are regionally as to what people will do.
Sure.
A lot of people, I think, in the business, people who are not in the business, rather, don't understand like our lifestyles and how we become affected by certain things. Like if you're on the road and you're used to having basically, to eat out every night, it's got to be something that's going to be ideally healthy, but something that's you're going to enjoy. And the cliche, a lot of pizza and wings or whatever after show. I mean, like we rarely get that because
because it's overdone.
It's overdone.
I mean,
who wants to eat pizza at midnight?
Yeah, exactly.
So, when I was 18, I didn't mind so much.
Exactly right. Well, for me, it's like the pizza was always there growing up when you're doing gigs and stuff like that. It's just, and it's the easiest thing to do.
Oh,
but for that reason, it's not my first choice.
Not at all.
But I do like a good pizza.
I do.
If it's fresh, in the right place.
But there again, I wait till, I don't know about going back to New York anytime soon, but my favorite place currently is Joe's in Greenwich Village.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard of that one. I don't think I've been to that one. I have some New York people that are pretty good pizza snobs.
Yeah.
They'll point me in the right direction.
It's unfortunate. That's one of the pitfalls of our business is you get accustomed to all this different fare from around the world and like, well, I can afford that, so I'm going to pursue getting that. But then in that pursuit, sometimes people don't understand why you enjoy it or why you're going to have that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, is there anybody that I didn't cover or anything that you wanted to shout out to, or anything that we didn't talk about that was a highlight for you?
Oh yeah, I've been very fortunate to have lots of different diverse gigs in town. And when I first came to town, I was working as a stagehand, as I mentioned, and the Ryman had been closed from 1974 to 94. It was a Gaylord property when they opened the new Opry House at Opryland, where we're just coming back to. They moved everything, and that building went into decay. It became dormant. I think they were storing things there, and it just was an adjacent building they owned. So. They decided to remodel it and all that, and when it reopened in '94, I was on the inaugural stagehand crew, and I was apparently well liked and did a good job because I kept coming back for many years, and by the time I started working at the Ryman as a stagehand prior to actually getting an audio gig in Nashville, so I had to get a couple of years of doing audio in Nashville before I could be accepted as a mixer, even though I'd done it regionally before. So after getting a couple of different gigs under my belt, I was asked to fill in doing audio, doing either front of house or monitors, and I would do that for any number of different things. Working with Les Banks when he took over at that gig, and but prior to Les, there was a guy named John Slimgen who was the audio guy, and I learned a lot about the Ryman and all of its pitfalls. And of course, the Ryman is a very interesting venue. Until recently, it was like two different venues, upstairs and downstairs. And there have been many permutations of that audio system in there, from the trap boxes that were installed, the JBLs, to the current line array they have, and in many different versions in between. So during that time, I spent more and more time doing audio, still working stagehand jobs. And of course, the more and more I got on the road, I think by like '99, I stopped doing stagehand work because I didn't need to. I was mixing full time, and that was my ultimate goal anyway. So I was fortunate to mix, I worked with like Donna Summer doing a thing with her there. I mean, it did some Crossroads, Lionel Richie and Kenny Rogers Crossroads was a cool thing I did, and other different things.
Yeah.
And then in 2005 or 4, Les was going on tour with John Fogerty.
Mm-hmm.
And I just actually, 2003, had worked with Les and John Fogerty together, but I was not going back, and Les was. So I took Les's place at the Ryman for that season, where I was the
very cool.
A1 or whatever.
Yeah,
And so I really enjoyed getting a very good roster that year, and kind of tapered off after that because I had been busy, and every time Les would call, I was not available. And of course, as we know,
Yeah.
the more you do that, the less you get called.
Exactly
So,
right. They know you're busy. They don't.
So it's been a few years since I've been at the Ryman, but it's a very good,
it's
important
awesome.
part of my Nashville experience.
Well, absolutely. In a house gig like that, no, I had Les in here. I was Les Banks in here. Very fortunate to get him in here, talking some of that history as well, and asked him about some of the highlights of. There's a lot of acts that'll come through. Some of these national acts come through, and they don't have an engineer. And so, and I know that as a house gig, it's fantastic when you get to mix again something that maybe you grew up on or something like that. Can you remember any of those? I mean, I know you probably had a bunch of those when you were as a house guy in there. Some of the acts that came through that you got to mix and were, really had a blast doing that.
Try to think about specifically who came in, and there was a lot. I mean, I mixed the Opry because the Opry would come, as you know, the Ryman, and Tommy would. At the time, Tommy was mixing it, and he would go out for his smoke break, and I would be mixing the Opry, and it would be kind of fun. I got to do that over the course of the year several times, and so that was always fun to mix the Opry. As far as individual artists that came in, I really enjoyed doing the Chris Christopherson solo gig. He came in and he wanted just to do he wanted to sound check with just the sound guy, and he came in and I set the spotlights up with just 2 lights, black Ryman with him and a monitor from front of house, a wedge from front of house, and he was like, "Hey Rick, how's the sound up there?" I said, "Oh man, what an honor! It sounds incredible." He's like, "All right, buddy, thanks a lot. That's good for me."
Wow.
And I went down there and met his wife and his whole family, his kids, and he was the nicest guy. That was a pleasure to do that one at the Ryman.
Huge. That's legendary.
It is. I was fortunate to mix some artists I was touring with. Also, I mixed Art at the Ryman, and I got to mix John Prine as well, and those were memorable gigs for me there.
Very cool. Well, you've done it all, so I like to ask what your advice is to newcomers that are trying to do this, trying to follow that path, of trying to get into the business. Of course, now's a different time right now with the pandemic, but if we didn't have that, you have any tips for newcomers?
Well, different tips for different departments. If you're going to be an audio guy, I would just say learn your frequencies, understand what that means, and understand gain structure.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, make sure that you have good people skills, because that's more important than knowing your frequencies, honestly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I've learned that we've all, learned by making mistakes and grow from those and take different paths and different approaches. But those are the main things for audio. I mean, as far as like getting into management, it takes a certain type of person to be able to even want to do that, let alone have the ability. So there's a combination of many factors, I think, that make that so. But you got to have thick skin, and you got to take things with a grain of salt. I mean, you have to know, when to keep things under wraps. You have to be good. You have to be calm. Calm is one of the most important things you can do. I mean, nobody likes a guy who runs around like a chicken with his head cut off. And we've all done it. There are all times when we had so much stress or whatever circumstances that create that. But keeping your head is a really, really important thing in a managerial position and in audio too.
Yeah. Being able to travel and live together and that sort of thing is an art in itself. You know what I mean? I always try to recommend that, if they can take any job, whether it's selling merch or whatever, just get out there and see what everybody's doing and learn how to travel. Learn how to travel with each other, because it's a confined space.
And no shoes in the hallway.
Yeah, there you go. No shoes in the hallway. And that courtesy, the bus courtesy, just common courtesy, that sort of thing, living around each other, even when you're not on the bus. You're just kind of living with each other for whatever extended period it is.
Turn the lights off, no slamming doors, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
People live here. Clean up after yourself.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I really appreciate you doing this. He is a tour manager, production manager, audio engineer extraordinaire. He's doing it in a real way and will be for a long time. He is Rick Reith. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
Good talking with you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for watching this episode. Sadly, in January of 2022, we lost our friend Rick Reith. And now we'd like to share some memories of our dear friend.